Hey, welcome back. We are on part 3 of our 1/100th scale Revell MI-24 complete build comparison to the Team Yankee Hind and, you know, making a custom stand, yada yada, all the above. So where the last video left off, we had just finished painting the interior. I've given it several hours to cure, dry, cure, and get ready. So now we're going to do a little bit of detail painting in the cockpit areas. We're going to do some decals in the cockpit areas, and we're going to do the little teeny tiny windows for the passenger compartment / cargo compartment. They can put passengers in there, they can carry reloads for the external weapons in there, whatever they want to do. I'm going to start by just doing a little bit of black inside the cockpit. Selected areas, a little bit of detailing on the seats. Just some little bits here and there. Again, you know, the visibility inside here is going to be not that great. This is an overly thick piece of plastic for the scale. We're going to see some of it, but not all of it. So, you know, I'm going to not skimp. I'm going to work with the detail we're given, but I'm not expecting a whole lot out of it. I'm going to work with some actual photos I have of the inside of a Hind to do the detailing the best I can. I'll show you the finished result in a second. Just a little bit of work done. Some decals, instruments, controls, seat cushions, a little flat coat on some decals, scraped away a little bit of the paint inside where the windows will bracket in, so I could glue them down, and then painted the interior color right there on the space in between, so they look pretty good where they're gonna go. And then I'm gonna use, just to make masking easier, I'm gonna use a liquid masking film so I can just blop it on there when I'm ready to paint. So with that done, I think we're ready to actually get this thing put together. So what I'm gonna do to help get this all to adhere is I'm gonna scrape the paint off this little ledge where the cockpit is going to sit. So that we have plastic on plastic contact there. I'm going to start by gluing it into one side, and it's going to go right into there. And then when we glue on the other side, we'll just put a little bead of glue on the other shelf. And it should sit nicely, and when we glue the whole thing together, you know, God willing, it all fits evenly. We'll see how that all works out in a sec. So I'm gonna put that bead of glue on now. And then get these two halves together. Okay. And then I'm going to start at the top, joining the fuselage halves together, just so I have some place to start, really. I mean, I'm just arbitrarily picking right here. I'm trying to minimize that seam so we don't have a lot of sanding work to do. Unfortunately, having the paint on the inside does inhibit the adherence of the glue just a little bit, so we gotta, you know, give it some manual help and hold it there for a little second longer than we would normally, but it should give us a relatively nice, easy seam between parts to work with. There's going to be a little sanding right there. Tail boom feels relatively smooth. Yeah, there's just extra plastic in that section right there. That's going to be a little hassle. But light sanding is all we're going to have to deal with. There's going to be a little bit of a gap right around there that we're going to have to fill, I can tell already. So I'm not too worried about it. I've already made peace with it. It's going to have some filling and sanding. Not that big a deal. So I'm just going to go around the rest of the fuselage and get this all glued up and together, and we'll take a look at it. Little bit of sanding around the top and the bottom as well. Sanding all around, a little bit of rescribing here and there, but our fuselage is together and looks pretty good. So now I'm going to run through the rest of the steps on this page. We're going to install some intakes, some filters, top of the engine housing. We're going to do some work under the chin. We're going to install some parts to the, that's actually the missile guidance section right there, and parts for the Doppler under the tail boom and everything. We're going to do that. And then after that's done, we're actually going to pause on the construction for a minute and start to work on that base, because the method I want to use is going to take a little bit to dry, and we'll talk about that in a moment. One of the really interesting things to me about this kit is the difference in where Revell versus Battlefront chose to invest in putting detail in, and it's just kind of funny to me looking at different parts where, you know, some of it is very highly detailed, some of it just is not. For instance, under the nose, the cannon section, the missile guidance section, the front radar sensor, it's just so much more detailed on the Battlefront kit than it is here on the Revell kit. And you know, in fact, even the intakes and everything are just better. The whole front engine section is better on the Battlefront kit. But then you have all these panel lines and everything else here on the Revell kit. So just, you know, different companies, different molding and everything. So we're gonna put this aside for a second, and we are going to start working on the base, because I'm going to use some air drying clay to kind of strengthen, not only reinforce the space I'm making, but to help hold the acrylic post, and also to give some texture to it so we can have it kind of like a landscape. But that can take up to 3 days to dry, the particular clay that I use for different things. So I've just used a typical Battlefront flight stand to trace this shape out. So it's going to be the same shape, same size as a Battlefront flight stand. I'm just going to use some, foam core poster board as the base for it. And I'm going to make it a little easy by cutting this out to begin with. So I'm going to start by cutting out the oval, and I'm just going to trace the shape. And then I'm going to use the clay on top of it to, like I said, strengthen it and sort of build up a little bit of a hilly texture, because I want to make sure that we really hold that acrylic rod on nicely. But I also don't, since we don't have the original, I want it to look nice. I want to make it a little bit extra. I want it to sort of pop. Those are words I don't normally use when describing anything. But I also want to give it a little bit of weight to hold everything, because this foam board is very light and a little bit flimsy, to tell you the truth, as we cut through it all. Now, I could have just used the scissors to cut this out, but that tends to crimp the edges a little bit, and I'm not sure I want to do that yet. So that's why I'm just using the X-Acto to do the cutting. A little bit more work, but I think worth it in the end. And all this extra, will be filled in by the clay. We can actually just use a sanding stick to sort of work that out a little. By using the clay, we can also have kind of an irregular shape around it, like it's a real terrain feature or something. It'll look really interesting, not just the same old thing. To get our flight stand mounted, I'm just going to take some measurements, and we're going to find a rough center to this thing. Little bit towards the rear, but you know what? It'll work. It'll do fine. And this is where we will place the initial hole. Let's just give it a little bit of an opening. And for this, I don't mind just using a Dremel real quick to make that hole as big as we need it to be. This hole is just a little bit big, but it doesn't matter to me because we're going to use the clay to build this surface up. So it'll be just fine when it's all finished. It won't really matter at all. Only reason I'm putting the tape down is so that it might be a little easier to, if the, oops, without that, oh well, it'll be fine. Is that if the clay decides to be a little tricky, it'll be easier to peel the clay up later. It's very forgiving stuff to work with. This is what we got here, and I've used it several times to make a lot of different stuff. Helicopter will fit in kind of like that. Get some clay out so you can get it moldable. And you know, once it's dry, you can use pretty much any kind of painting, finishing you want on it. You can apply glue to it, whatever you want to do. This might be way more than I need, but we'll figure that out as we go. I want to cover the whole thing. So the first step is going to be stabilizing this exactly where I want it. Now I'll just work outwards, adding clay around the base. And instead of just a plain old flat flight stand, you know, this will give us, I won't make it too big, too much wider, but a nice irregular shape too that we can mold. And when we add some little terrain pieces too, and some grass and everything, add a little hilliness to it over there. Now, yeah, you could just order the extra flight stand from Battlefront. I'll tell you what, though, I have an order of just 2 sprues, an M113 and a, I think it's a T72 that has been in the processing phase for like a week and a half now. So I don't know how their orders usually run, but I'm not impressed. Not impressed at all. So I'm happier to just do this right now. Make myself something a little creative. It will get rigid soon. It just won't be fully dried and cured for a little bit. All right, so yeah, now I just let this kind of sit for a little bit. Once again, make sure that the flight stand is sticking up vertical. So my helicopter is flying straight and level. And let it harden up. I've actually given this a couple days to harden up and dry properly. And in the meantime, once it was about a day dry, you know, dry on the outside, I cut some of the foam out from the bottom of the base because I wanted, you know, this was going to absorb some of the water that was in the clay. I wanted to make sure it dried thoroughly and evenly. And so once it was rigid enough to handle and move around, I just did a little bit of cutting out of the paper and the foam so it wouldn't absorb and hold a lot of water in the center as it was trying to dry out, and we'd get a nice even dry all the way around. And that worked pretty well. So now we can take the helicopter out and pause a little bit here.